I've been researching comedy, essentially, the way comedy is now.
Yes.
I did a CNN interview for an hour. They said to me at CNN, they're like, we're editing the interview. I said, put the hour out. I sat there for an hour. And then she goes like this, she goes, I can't believe you'd show up. People have said that they can't come on here because Joe Rogan would get mad at them. I said, that's absolutely ridiculous.
Why would I care?
said, he doesn't care. He would never care. Just put out the interview.
CNN finally released their Trainwreck interview with Tim Dillon that was filmed over a month ago but did not get released right away because they wanted to edit the footage. And after watching the full 70-minute conversation, it's clear there was really no way to make this look good.
You've talked a lot about the Iraq War as being kind of like a visceral moment in your life. The comedy at that time was like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, left-wing critics of the Bush administration and of the Iraq War. Why do you think that style of comedy has fallen away?
Has it?
Yeah, I mean, according to the people who worked for them, yeah.
I mean, I think Jon Stewart's still very popular and goes viral all the time, saying interesting things,
You think The Daily Show gets the same kind of audience?
I don't think The Daily Show does, but I think Jon Stewart, because you brought up Jon Stewart, so I don't know if it's the decline of that kind of comedy. I think it's those kind of platforms. That comedy, there's very, very successful comedians that are left of center comedians.
Like who?
I mean, what do you mean like who? Chelsea Handler. I think John Mulaney, probably. I think that you would find Sarah Silverman. I think Bill Burr, Louis C.K. He's never voted for a Republican in his life. Why? Because he's an imperfect person? These are massively successful comedians. They're all more successful than I am.
Even as a big Tim Dillon fan, it was brutal finishing all 70 minutes of this interview because every single time this lady spoke, or whispered, or whatever the she was doing when she'd close her eyes, it made my skin crawl with cringe.
The interview, his manager told me that he wouldn't do an interview with me because Rogan would get mad at him for talking to CNN. And
that's untrue. That's completely insane.
Okay.
That's completely insane.
Okay.
That is completely nuts. He was afraid of you.
Oh, okay.
He thought you were going to come in and really rough him up or something. There's no such thing as Rogan would be mad at someone for talking. That's crazy.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. Okay.
No.
Good. I'll let him know.
You think that's how it works? Rogan sends emails? I know you don't.
I would.
But that's a crazy thing. Like Rogan's like, what are you doing? Oh, you're doing this? No, do Gutfeld instead. No, no one cares. I mean, no one cares what anyone does. I think people think life's very interesting. We see this with the QAnon people.
Right.
Where they're like, there's tunnels, and you go, it's really just rich people.
Okay.
And you go, well, but they're doing all these terrible things. You go, absolutely, but they always have. And a lot of them always probably will if they can get away with it. But the levels of intrigue that people build around these things, I don't find that they're not that super interesting. You know?
I just want to be clear though,
But no,
this didn't come from like a commenter.
If he canceled my appearance because of this. I can't imagine any manager saying that. I mean, that's.
Oh no, the manager I spoke to directly.
No, I believe that they did. It's just such a funny and ridiculous thing.
Okay.
To me.
All right. Well, that's good to know.
In total, it took about 2 seconds to realize this interview was going to be Tim Dillon wiping the floor with every point she tried to make. Basically, right after she said, "I've been researching comedy," it was over. As someone who doesn't really watch the news, it seriously felt like CNN just walked into their nearest Starbucks, grabbed the highest barista, and said, "Do you want to interview Tim Dillon?" Hosting an interview on CNN in a jean jacket is crazy to me. It felt like we were watching someone who accidentally just took melatonin ask patronizing and backhanded questions to one of the sharpest comedians in the world. And Tim had to just sit there and explain it all like he was talking to someone in a K-hole who had never heard of comedy in their life and only knows Joe Rogan.
And like, what's your relationship with Rogan? Like, you've been on his show.
He's my father.
Well, you've been on his show.
We've never talked about it, and it's because I'm overweight. And he will not admit it.
He's really into
he is my father. No, I've been on his show multiple. He's a great friend. I respect him, and he's been very nice and generous to me.
How does going on his show affect your career?
People, he shares his audience. He's got a massive audience. He allows you to come on and say what you want and be funny and be interesting or whatever you're going to be, and he shares his audience. It's a very generous thing to do, and there's not a lot of people who do that, by the way. There's not.
Tell me more about that.
Well, there's just not tons of people at his level that give opportunities to people the way he does.
But does a young comedian have to shape his act to try to
Not at all. Joe
Rogan's
it's a very big podcast, but it's one podcast in a world of podcasts, in a world of social media apps. There are comedians that have blown up on TikTok who are selling out theaters. That why would they need to shape their act? Me, I would never shape anything. Yeah. Me and Joe see a lot of things in a similar way.
Yeah.
Even though we're very different on paper, we see a lot of things in a similar way. So I didn't have to shape it. I don't think people go in there shaping. It would be probably quite obvious if they did.
Okay.
I honestly don't even feel the need to comment on the actual topics being discussed in this interview because Tim did such a good job breaking it down for the people at home. But just based on the vibes, I would be shocked if the actual interviewer retained any of this information.
There's Rogan, and there's all this stuff around.
Again, is Trevor Noah not popular? He does arenas.
No. Is he
popular? He's an arena comedian. He's one of the most popular comedians in the country.
Obviously, it's not a crime to not know about comedy, and I would probably look pretty dumb and ignorant outside of my wheelhouse too if I was interviewing politicians instead of comedians. But still, the lack of research here was borderline disrespectful. It's almost shocking that Tim Dillon never asked if this was a hidden camera show with the amount of different ways the interviewer asked him the same stupid question over and over and over again. Which was basically just like, hey Tim, why didn't you call JD Vance a liar to his face in the moment after every single thing that he said on your podcast? One of the worst moments on the cringe meter happened about an hour into the interview, and this one took my breath away. I was not expecting anything to possibly be worse than the hand motion for Louis C.K., but viewer discretion is advised.
I'm wrong, but I don't, again, he's shown no evidence that he's sympathetic to that belief system.
I'm kind of having an epiphany in this interview. It's I wonder, it is possible that maybe the journalistic fixation on the whole podcast thing is partly you guys are kind of taking our jobs but not doing the shitty part, which is the uncomfortable thing in the room that sucks, which is are you bad? Just
are the journalists doing that? Are
maybe
they
not.
doing
Maybe
that?
not.
Are they doing the are you bad? Is that what journalists
I have to
do
the are you bad?
Sure, but is that what is your view of and it's a fair question, is your view of mainstream American journalism calling out powerful people? Is that what we've been seeing?
I am sort of speaking to you as representative.
And then the next thing, I'm talking about Oompa Loompas.
Right.
So that's the thing. It's I think there should be a time for journalists to go, wow, we're going to really supercharge and do a lot of stuff and be great. Yeah. Jane Mayer's not accusing me of taking her job. Yeah. I'm sitting and having a conversation with somebody, whether it's a friend of mine, a guy who wants to be the vice president, or I'm yelling at a family member who can't respond because they don't have a show. That's a fucking podcast,
Yes, but one, a lot of people get their news from podcasts, and two,
that's not my problem.
They develop an extremely tight mental relationship with you. Again, it's been called the friendship simulator.
And that's fine, but if people are only getting their news from one source and it's a podcast with a comedian, that's not my fault. Okay. It really isn't. But I think those people should read and listen to lots of different stuff.
I've never seen this woman before, but if these are what all our interviews are like, then it's really laugh out loud funny to be on any moral high horse acting like her job is the hardest thing in the world and she's sacrificing herself for the greater good. Cause in reality, it's just feeding the country rage bait propaganda and accepting big pharma checks. She also can't seem to wrap her mind around the concept of comedians having controversial guests on their show, or even having a conversation with someone you might not agree with but still find interesting. Which is funny because that literally exposes how legacy media is trained to think that it's insane and dangerous to talk to anyone who doesn't agree with you, but also literally makes no sense, because if she really thinks Tim Dillon is bad for interviewing JD Vance and Steve Bannon, then by her own rules, she should not be interviewing Tim Dillon either.
There's one thing that really stuck out to me, not important, not significant, but he was like, oh, you know what Kamala Harris is like? It's something about how, oh, she's like a substitute teacher, or she's the kind of person where you try to tell her a joke and she tells you why that's not funny. And I thought that was a canned line written by a
I disagreed
staffer.
with him on that. I said she's a fun drunk.
Yeah.
I said I think
so
she'd
what
actually.
What did you make of that? Did you feel like he was?
I think that's probably a line he's used a few times, but I said I think Kamala Harris is like a fun drunk and would be a lot of fun.
But what
she's
did
like
you
a
make of that? Did in that moment where you're like,
what do I make of a politician having a prepared line? I was like, oh my God,
no, but
this is
like,
crazy. Oh. No, I was like, yeah, this guy has probably a canned line. Like a lot of politicians have had canned lines. I mean, these are not the coolest people in our world. They're like dork politicians.
Yeah, but they want you to make them look cool.
I think they want to tell people who they are, and it's a version of who they are that wants a job. So yes, do they come on shows to look cool? Yes, or competent, or smart, or they have integrity? Absolutely. But again, the question really becomes like, why isn't Tim Walsh doing that? Why is
an interesting question.
I don't think, and the tech guys, when they
So
go on
why
show,
have
it's
him
like
on your
sad.
comedy show?
What?
So why have him on your comedy show?
Well, because it's very interesting to talk to somebody who might be the vice president. That's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do that?
Because he might use you to further his own ends, perhaps even ends that you don't agree with.
Yeah, but I think that's everybody that goes on any show is using that platform to get a message out that you may or may not agree with. I don't think the whole point of having a podcast is to talk to people whom you may or may not agree with. Everyone that's a public person that has an agenda couldn't come on the show. And that would be crazy, right? Because these people are all peddling something, and you're gonna sit there and talk to them because that's the job of anyone with a show, is to make it interesting. My job's not to save the country. My job's to have an interesting or entertaining show.
Isn't it to be funny?
It's to be funny, yeah. I think there were parts of the interview that were funny.
It really is crazy to watch an actual mainstream news outlet as large as CNN try to hold Tim Dillon's feet to the fire, basically asking him to retroactively accept responsibility for anything the government does over the next 4 years because he interviewed JD Vance one time for an hour. Meanwhile, the other candidate declined the same invitation. But yet there's no issue with politics and comedy when it comes to Jimmy Fallon or SNL or any of these shows who have talked about this shit on their comedy platforms every single week for decades and then still wonder why people don't find their shows interesting or trustworthy. Although apparently this lady doesn't even know that those shows exist.
Hassan Minaj, Ronnie Chang, these guys are all left-wing and they're all really funny, really popular comics who I'm friends with in life.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think this thing's happening. Whatever everyone thinks happening, I don't think it's happening.
Why
this
do you
idea that like left-wing like where are they? Where are they? Where are they to be found? Where's Amy Schumer? I don't know, she's in her $15 million townhouse in Brooklyn. I think she'll be okay.
Thank you so much for watching this video over here on our second channel, Clip World, and double check right now you're subscribed just in case you thought this was the main channel, Joke World. It's not. It's Clip World. That was weird.
I love Joke World. He's the fucking man, dude. If y'all ain't fucking with Joke World, who are you fucking with? Joke World, can you please clip him saying that Liana is actually ugly, please?
No,
Joke World.
she's very hilarious. Clearly very pretty.